This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem.
Previously on Council of Geeks.
Please don't have them fall in love. Have them come to an understanding. Have them care about each other, but don't have that manifest as romantic entanglements, please. I have Shape of Water. I love Shape of Water. I don't need this to become Shape of Water. Well, I suppose as a silver lining, I can thank this same batch of episodes for giving me the perfect reaction image and sound for this. Russell, I told you to not do one thing. Okay, that's not true. I told you to not do a couple of things. But I told you primarily not to do like two things, and this was one of them. But you know what? We're going to hold off the bitching until later for a couple of reasons. Partially because I don't want to give the impression that I think the thing has suddenly nosedived off a cliff. It hasn't. It has done a very specific thing that I didn't want it to do, but also that is to my taste, and it is possible that it worked much better for you. I am still going to make arguments later as to why I don't think it does work, even if that is what you like, but also you don't have to agree with me. But I want to put that off because things didn't really start going south until last quarter or so of episode 3. Prior to that, it was so good. There was so many moments, little things that were in there. Again, so many moments that trusted the audience to get it. Right from the beginning, I love that they skip over what I expected this to open with. I expected this to open like with this, big chastising of Barclay or, just being like, well, how could you agree to do that? Why would, all this hemming and hawing over what it was he's agreed to. We skip all that and we get right to the logistics because the logistics are tense and terrifying enough. We can skip over whatever chewing out he got from Kate or anybody else for having agreed to this. He did. They have to deal with it now, and that's right where we jump in. That's the perfect place for this to jump in, as far as I'm concerned. I mentioned it already in my opening gag, but that moment of him screaming underwater is perfect. I absolutely adore that. And then another moment that I really loved is he's getting ready to leave and he goes back and he sees his family. And initially I wasn't quite sure what to think with his kid Kirby kind of having already slipped into deep environmental despair, which is definitely a thing that our younger generations are prone to, not undeservedly, unfortunately. But I was like, is this too far? Is this too harsh? But then two things happened that just reinforced how much I adore this family dynamic. The first thing is when Barclay is alone with his ex-wife and he starts telling her, why he's going to do this. He has to be strong and do this. And he's cracking. You can tell how scared he is while he's trying to give this big, brave man speech. And it's so clear how terrified he is. And then she gives him permission to be scared and he starts crying. And Kirby rushes in and hugs him and wants him to be okay. This dynamic of this family, and Barclay in particular, as a depiction of a man doing something that he thinks is important, but terrifies the hell out of him, and not have it be he just crushes it all down and that's why he's a man. No, he's grappling with this. He is terrified and he's going to do it anyway. And it doesn't mean he suddenly stops being scared just because he's made the decision to do this. It's so good. I adore absolutely all of that. I like the dynamic of the group that gets sent down there. We'll deal a little bit more with Ted and some of the other stuff that goes on with him later. But like, I like that there's this guy who's a young guy who hasn't experienced a lot of life who just didn't think he'd be there. And you have this older guy who, at least initially, very chipper about the whole thing. Then you've got the strict professionals with the general and the other person from unit. And I like that dynamic. There's so much wonderful tension in the descent. I love how much time they spent on that, because it's the kind of thing that, again, would be very easy to gloss over. But no, let's make a point of how dangerous it is what they are doing. There is one shot in particular that I loved. It is this shot of this thing descending, and it is just in this sea of black and murk. Generally, when you see something being lowered into the depths like this, you see it from a top-down perspective. And this does have that shot as well, but it's this one in particular that I love. And I think the difference is when you see the more classic shot of like it descending into the darkness and you have a top-down view, your brain knows that, yes, it's shrinking into darkness, and that is a powerful image, but your brain also knows part of that's perspective. Part of that is just, it's getting further away from me. But to see the thing lowering, and it doesn't get any smaller, but as it enters the center of the frame, it just gets more and more swallowed by the darkness, even though it is not literally vanishing into the darkness. It is such an amazing shot. Like, mwah. That is the kind of stuff that makes me so excited. I'm going to cite a really weird example because it's from an episode that I freaking hate. But there was also this one shot from the Interstellar Song Contest, which was incredible. When, honestly, anything, be it Doctor Who or anything else, can give me something that is not about the highest fidelity image or the most impressive special effects ever put together, but just a really well-composed, striking shot. That's what's going to stick in my head so much more than whatever you spend a bajillion dollars on. Like, I'm sure that wasn't the cheapest shot in the world to get, but also compared to a lot of the other stuff we show, I bet you that was not that expensive, and it's so impactful. At least it was to me. We have the scene of Kate barging in on this meeting and realizing that all the other people in this room are assuming that peace talks were fail and are already not only preparing for war to happen, but are fully prepared to be the first ones to strike because they assume it's all going to fall apart anyway. And I also like that she's not actually the only one in the room who thinks this is the bad idea. She is the most adamant about it, but there's another woman in there as well who's like, we really shouldn't be doing this. So I like that it's not her against the world necessarily. And also, it kind of gets reinforced later. The prime minister is less gung-ho about this, but he's just weak. He's just a cowardly politician who came into power with his own agenda and was not prepared to be thrown a curveball like this and doesn't know what to do and is deferring to people who act like they know what they're doing. Which, yeah, that tracks. But I thought that scene was pretty well worked out. Again, coming back to that descent, I like how long it took. I like that the characters inside, different ones of them get stressed at different points. I really liked Barclay talking down Ted from his stress. That was really good stuff. And then they get to the bottom, and, it does what I figured, like, there's going to somehow be atmosphere. They're going to be able to take the helmets off. Which is exactly what happened. But again, there is good tension and building in that. And then we got the first hint of the thing that I told the show not to do, because we have this moment of her touching his skin, and then he asks, "Can I touch you?" And there's this little very clear moment where he's about to lean in and kiss her. And I'm sorry, this has not been earned at all. It hasn't. This is the epitome of why I hate romantic subplots in so many things. Not in 100% of things. And to be clear, I actually can like romance when it is the primary focus and done well. That's going to be relevant later when I start making comparisons that are kind of inevitable. But within something where the romance was not why I came and is not, in my view, a necessary component of the story being told, I hate this so much. They have a great connection based strictly off the fact that they are both speaking on behalf of a people who are angry and scared. And they also see a certain degree of humanity in the other. And they bond over things like she lost her children. He's trying to save his child. The tension of the situation is drawing them together. I do not need or want sexual or romantic tension, because not every single time a man and a feminine presenting being, boy, that's something that I bet they're never going to deal with the logistics of, but whatever. Or if they do, how much you want to bet it's going to be a freaking throwaway joke line. But even setting that aside, just because a masculine and feminine presenting person have good performance chemistry doesn't mean it has to be romantic or sexual. God, I hate this. So, and it's just going to go further down that road, but like stick a pin in it, we'll come back to it. Coming back to Ted, the instant I saw the globe, actually, no, let's be fair. Immediately the scene after we saw the globe, because we see him with the globe, and he has this thing that's like, this is a gift for them. You know, this is a view of the world that they're not used to. They're used to from the water up. And you know, this is wood. It's something they don't have down there. And I remember thinking in the scene where they presented, oh, that's kind of a neat idea. And then as soon as it cut away from it and the next scene started, I was like, oh, that's a bomb, isn't it? And I was right. So Ted sets this thing off, and Salt saves Barclay and does what is initially presented as mouth-to-mouth to ensure that he doesn't drown on the way back up to the surface. There's also very clearly, visually some kind of weird bubble that she puts around him, so I guess the pressure won't kill him. But, we don't even get a technobabble hand-wavy explanation of that. This is actually frustrating for more reasons than just the romantic thing. I wasn't super thrilled with the idea of the bomb going off once I realized what it probably was. Because honestly, I have adored the tensions innate in the negotiations of what is going on. I didn't need a monkey wrench that big thrown into it, at least not at this point. Maybe I'm the weird one, but I really love when something can inject harsh tension into two people talking and not need to explode something. And I thought this series had been doing a very good job of that up to this point. So it felt like it lost the confidence of its own convictions and started to think, well, like, yeah, we're doing these talky scenes really well, but it's not enough. We got to go bigger. And I'm over here going like, no, do less. It was good. Maybe that is just me. I legit don't know. And then, of course, last thing in the third episode, Kate and Christopher. Okay, look. The moments we get of their relationship are sweet. It's like, I'm not going to go over my issues with the power dynamic again. The show has decided it is not going to deal with that, but also simultaneously try and put them in a way that it presents their dynamic as like, well, it has not come up or been a problem. I still don't think it's actually okay, but like, whatever. I'll set that aside. So when you have the moments like him saying like, you are too tired, you need to go home and sleep, that whole conversation, those are nice moments. And then we get back to our apartment. First of all, we get the red sniper dot, which everybody needs to stop. I know why you do it. I do, but it's wrong and it's fake. And unless it's a silly show, like in a silly show, in a silly movie, fine. You can have your dot on the forehead. Anything that isn't campy or silly or so over the top that you're not meant to take it seriously, stop doing that. Snipers don't use those for the exact reason that happens in this. Somebody else can spot it and suddenly your person, somebody dives and knocks them out of the way, or like, snipers don't use those. That's not a thing. I understand it's cinematic, but like, stop. It's so stupid. But the more important thing is Christopher gets shot and killed because of freaking course he does. And for me, at least, I'm going to largely deal with this now before I get into episode 4. This fell pretty flat. Now, I have been avoiding comparing this to Torchwood Children of Earth. The comparisons are starting to become inevitable, not just because it's a Doctor Who spinoff that's 5 episodes long and takes itself more seriously than the main show does. But now, because we have this death of a romantic interest and a previously established character, that begs comparison to Yanto dying in Children of Earth. But this doesn't hit anywhere near as hard. And to be clear, and I know I'm an outlier in this, I don't think the death of Yanto was especially well done there either, but it was definitely done better than this. If for no other reason than we have seen this guy, 4 times prior to this show happening? And we have only seen them as a couple hinted at in the reality war and for 2 episodes prior to this in small isolated scenes. That is not enough. The reason why Yanto's death, if it worked for you, the reason why it did more than anything is because he'd been in the show for 2 full series and his relationship with Jack had been around for a while. This is not the case here. This feels like the cheap knockoff store brand version of that. And it adds very little. I was tempted to say it adds nothing. That's not true, because I will say that the scenes of Kate dealing with the aftermath of that and the loss of that are pretty well handled, and she plays the grief of a woman who still also feels it is direly important that she maintain composure and keep doing her job. She plays that very well. So I don't want to say that there's nothing of value out of this. Not enough to be worth having done it, though, at least in my view. All right. So episode 4. Now, episode 4, I'm going to have way fewer nice things to say, but I do have a few. A lot of it's little small moments, but I have a few. The idea of AI and deepfakes being used to create a fake video taking credit for the thing. Yeah, that seems even more timely than when it was probably written. I already mentioned Kate mourning the loss of Christopher. That was well handled, even though I think the death itself didn't land. As the American and French general continue to manipulate the prime minister, I like the way that it kind of brings up some infighting things. Like, I really like the prime minister pointing out that business guy who clearly was coming and being like, I pull the strings of power. And the prime minister's like, that guy's a clown. Yeah, he's my biggest donor, but he's an idiot. And so I liked little touches like that. It made it feel more authentic than just a straightforward, I own the government. No, he took your money, but he also has no respect for you. So I liked a little thing like that. There's a tiny thing that I noticed that I actually really like, and I don't know, I might have to go back and see and double check other stuff with Gugu Mbatha-Raw and see whether she does this in other movies. But Barclay, when he looks in her eyes, he just looks steadily. Her eyes dart back and forth. She's basically looking from one eye to the other with him. And it's a really nice touch, and it gives her a twitchier sense than him. And I like it. I really like it as an acting choice. Assuming it is one and not just what she does, because in my experience, at least, some people will shift their focus from one eye to the other. Some people will be steadier. My eyes tend to actually drift to mouths. That's just kind of what happens. But anyways, I noticed it and I liked it. So we now have the character of Tide, who I am going to have some concerns about because it's continuing to lean into the other thing I told this show not to do and to be careful about. But there are some things that I like about Tide. I like the first thing that he says.
On behalf of the nations of the earth with a desire.
Why are you all insane?
What a perfect line, given what has just happened, that there was literally a bomb detonated at the peace talks by the humans. Why are you insane is a very fair question. I actually really like his line delivery as well, because given that his position within the narrative is more militaristic than Salt, he really could have been, much more shouty and, really overtly, sort of vocally violent. He's not. He's actually pretty calm, but there is still a lot of strength put behind what he says. So I actually really like the line deliveries from this guy. That having been said, There's like this line very specifically said by unit watching him.
Blood pressure, heart rate, both strong. Cortisol and adrenaline off the scale.
He's a warrior.
He's a warrior. Now, to be fair, they do not specifically cite the masculine presenting as the reason why he's a warrior, but he's showing up, masculine presenting, they're immediately using he, him, and he's a warrior. I said in my last review, be really careful with these gender swappy characters to not automatically attribute strength, rage, violence, physical power, or warriorness now, I guess, to strictly the male presenting versions of these characters. Don't do that, because it leans, unintentionally, I am sure, but it leans into some of the narratives of the idea that trans women or anyone who is doing an altered presentation or is presenting as different than other people perceive them to be, that the masculinity is somehow, power and violence and warrior-like. Now, again, is Tide being presented as a trans character? Is Salt? In the strictest sense, no. But when you are attributing these aspects to specific gender variants, especially in something in the UK right now, where there is so much emphasis from some very toxic elements that hold way too much sway, that puts all this emphasis on this idea that anyone who presents feminine, but in their view is not, that maleness is innately powerful, violent, dangerous, and always there. And even though I'm sure you are not meaning to touch on gender stuff with this, you are. So, there's only one episode to go. I know better than to go. Maybe they'll address it in the last episode. The last episode's going to be, big climax conclusion. I don't have hope this is going to be addressed. But at this point, I'm actually wondering why the gender swappy stuff was in there at all.
And I'm sure it was probably put in there because some fish and amphibians can do gender swap stuff, and they just thought it was a neat detail. But it feels like there was a real lack of thought about what this implies in general when you take it in the bigger context of not only the narrative, but the culture in which we're currently existing.
Because you've had Salt, other than that one moment, present only as feminine, and now you're having Tide presenting only as masculine. Yeah, would it have been a little generic? She's the negotiator, he's the warrior. Yes, a little bit, but you're not improving it by bringing the gender muddledness. You're making it worse. At least I think you are, personally. So, okay. All right. Let's deal with the shape of waterness of what is currently going on. And yes, I am going to directly compare what is going on between Barclay and Salt to The Shape of Water. Now, to be clear, I love The Shape of Water. That might be my favorite Guillermo del Toro movie. I adore that film. Part of why that film works is that the romance and the relationship and the connection between others is the primary focus of the movie. Is it the only thing the movie's about? No. It actually has a lot to say about fascism and the ostracizing of people that society deems unhelpful or unuseful. It has a lot to say, but it says that while primarily focusing on the connection between its lead and its creature. So that is there first and foremost, and this other stuff wraps around it. This, to me at least, was not about this romantic thing first and foremost. It was about this conflict. It was about the damage that humans have done to the ocean. It's about what happens when something comes forward that can actually hold us to account for what we have done and are still doing. What happens then? That's what I was here for. That's what I was all in on. And adding this in as a side thing doesn't work. Because as I said, this feels very unearned. Especially because Salt in episode 4 barely feels like the same character. Like she's giddy and flirty.
I'm sort of regulating my body for you to...
So I see.
And like, I'm not saying that she can't have these aspects to her personality. They actually have one line in there that is probably meant to imply a lot, but I think it is carrying too much weight to work on implication alone. She has a line where she says, "I am liberated." Now that implies a lot about the life she was living before, that her life under the water was restricted. Maybe she is a bit like Barclay in that she didn't even want this position, but kind of got thrust into it. And she's speaking because that is the role that has been assigned to her. Maybe what she actually wants to do is not any of this. And that carries a lot of implication. And if accurate, would justify her pretty sudden pivot to behaving quite differently. But also, as I kind of said, that's a lot to hang on just an implication. Like when you say, "I am liberated," from what? Like, yes, we get enough information that there is a very strict expectations of her, at least in these negotiations, and her now siding with humanity is like, they view that as bad. But again, that only gives us a tiny glimpse, and they pivot so much where she was righteously angry at humanity, and now she's staring into Barclay's eyes and being like, "Oh, you're warm, you're heat, I am drawn to it." I'm like, what the hell is going on? So there's one bit in this whole thing that I really liked, and it's when Salt says, "Well, you've seen the stars, we've stayed below, you've gone off world." Like, that felt way more justified as a reason to have some admiration for humanity in general. And, you know, obviously her connection with Barclay is much more one-on-one, and that's fine. That's working. Not the romantic aspect, but the rest of that was working. But that as being a reason why she still sees some value in humanity, that line worked really well. It's just buried under, you know, them describing how they taste.
The name I chose was appropriate because you taste of salt.
Is this an oral sex joke? I don't know. Add it to the concrete slab, and, you know, see how many inappropriate oral sex jokes has Doctor Who slipped in over the years. I don't know. Add this to the list. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who thought it was. But like, the thing is, as much as the romance ticks me off, I'm also real irritated at the fallout from the bomb, because I was really into this for a slow burn, incredibly tense negotiation and looming threat scenario. I was so here for that. And now it's become more actiony, and like they're on the run and it's a chase and captured and running away, and like it's not doing that bad, and I can even enjoy that. You know, I like those kinds of on the run espionage kind of things, but like I was enjoying something else that felt like I couldn't go as many other places and get that. And now you're giving me this, and this feels a heck of a lot more typical. I feel like the back half of episode 3 sacrificed the restraint that the show had been having up to that point, and that restraint was what had made it feel unique and made it felt less like what I was expecting, which I was expecting something pretty bland, and less like what other shows might do. But now with episode 4, this feels like, oh, this is what I would expect nearly any show with this initial setup to be doing by this point. And that's just frustrating. It's frustrating and it's disappointing.
Hey folks, jumping in from the edit for one last comparison to Children of Earth, because I didn't really get into the stuff with the American and French generals kind of taking over the situation. While I said I liked the characterization of the Prime Minister, and I stand by that, those two basically taking over and becoming the default villains of the piece, I don't like so much. It's a kind of simplification that is cheap, in my opinion. I think of Children of Earth, and I think of how the entire British government was culpable in that situation. Some more than others, for sure, but nobody's hands were totally clean.
And here, I'm not saying that the show isn't going to hold the prime minister responsible to some degree, but it's making it much cleaner and narrowing it down to way fewer people, to the point that they actually have to have lines in there trying to explain why it makes any sense that these two people who are not English are now commanding English troops. So it is something that is morally oversimplifying, but also logistically barely holds together anyway, and I don't like that. We will see how the last episode goes. I'm not going to, okay, to be fair, it's not unrecoverable. And also, to be fair, Children of Earth had a bum episode too. The second episode of that miniseries is kind of useless. But also, they got their useless episode out of the way early and then had 3 episodes to get good again after that. This has had its, well, not narratively useless, but like loaded up with all the stuff I don't want. It has been episode 4. They've only got 1 episode to bring it back. And at this point, especially with Doctor Who, I don't trust them to be able to recover. Because, like, boy, I gave a lot of leeway. You know, I've looked back at some of the reviews I did of season 2, and even as I went off on some of that stuff, rightfully so, and I stand by everything that I said, but I would say, like, look, maybe they'll address this later. Maybe they'll wrap this up later. And that's not just a RTD thing. I said the same thing about Chibnall with the Timeless Child. I hated it, but I'm like, let's see what he does with it. Turned out he did nothing. And so, and then Russell had similar issues with season 2. So I can acknowledge that it is factually true that the things that are throwing me off could be addressed in a way that makes all of this work much better in the 1 remaining episode. That is, strictly speaking, possible. Do I have any faith that that'll happen? No, I don't. Because I expect a more action-y climax. That's just where everything's kind of going and pointing by now. So, yeah, I don't know. The first 2.5, 2 2/3 episodes were so good. They were so good. And it's distinctly possible that if you're not me, and you don't have the innate problems with the romantic subplots taking over, that you aren't as frustrated. But I will still argue, I don't think they, A, earned the connection, and B, earned the sudden character shift for Salt. I don't think they've earned those things. Is it possible that they could have? Yes! Yes! It is possible that both those things could have been earned, but I don't think they were. So here we are. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. War Between the Land and the Sea, episodes 3 and 4. What did you think about them? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills. Enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. You're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons. Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lafulla, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twilord, Mystic Shadow, Tracy Scrabbit, Pal Barabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and shout-outs to some random folks from the lower tiers. Thanks to Callum Ray, 3 Muppets in a Trench Coat, and Alex Fireheart. If you want to hear me thank you by name, you can check out the reward tiers on the Patreon. You guys were pretty good today. Thank you.